So now we're talking about the quadratic equation. The quadratic equation says that x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. We use this equation all the time because sometimes it's not easy to find common factors inside of a quadratic equation. So let's go back to our same thing we just were talking about. X squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 0. Let's say we don't know what our equation is going to be. We don't know, we can't figure it out, we're in a test, we can't find out what the answer is. So we're going to use this equation which works every time to find out what it is. So let's talk about this. This is really 1x, right? Because we know that if nothing's in the front, it's just 1 times x. These letters that go on here correspond to the coefficients of each x exponent. So let me show you that in a little more detail. We have ax squared plus bx plus cx to the 0 equals d. That's what we're going to express this as. Get rid of this for now. So the quadratic formula, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So these letters correspond exactly what numbers are there. Don't worry about d for now, we'll talk about that later. So let's go back to our equation we had. I'm going to write it over here. I'm just going to get rid of this d here. And it was x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 0. So let's put this in our equation. We have 1 is a, so that's going to be 1 over it, but let's talk about b first. So negative b, which is 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 2 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 1. All over 2 times a, which is 1. So let's work this out. We've got negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 minus 4, which is 0, over 2. Square root of 0 is 0, so we've got negative 2 over 2, which is equal to negative 1, which we've already solved that is the answer to this. Let's double check to see. We're not really sure that may be the answer. We're confused in a test. Negative 1 is what we're saying x is equal to. Let's plug it back into our equation and see if it equals 0. Negative 1 squared plus 2 times negative 1 plus 1 equals 0. So let's multiply this out. Negative 1 squared is 1, plus 2 times negative 1 is negative 2, plus 1 equals 0. So we have 1 plus 1 is 2, so that's 2 minus 2, which does equal 0. 0 equals 0, perfect, we worked it out, the solution is correct. And that is how you use the quadratic equation. Now there may be some times where you get one that doesn't solve, where you have to use imaginary numbers to solve it. This is more complicated for a higher level of math, but if you end up getting underneath the square root, where we have b squared minus 4ac, that part of that equation, if 4ac is greater than b, we're going to have a negative number underneath the square root. And we have a negative number under the square root, that's a bad thing. We want to extract it to the square root of negative 1 times the square root of whatever the number is. The square root of negative 1 is known as I, or an imaginary number, and we have the square root of the number that's there. But we'll talk more about imaginary numbers in different formats. Thanks a lot. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments.